All right, next up will be Dave Jellings, and he's going to talk a little bit about these user group trials they did. And he has three case studies? Okay, go for it.
If anybody shouts next, I will not be amused. Okay. I've not seen that one before.
That's mine, that's why.
Ah.
Let me put yours up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, right, fair enough. Well, what I'll do is just tell you about the user group in the UK. Try again. This is not amusing anymore. No. Okay, I'll leave that. Okay, the BuildingSMART user group has a number of remits. The primary remit of the user group is to interact with and represent the views of users. Pretty logical. We do that primarily through initiating, running, managing and reporting a series of field trials. So why do we do that? To me, it's very simple. My life view is, as you know by now, extremely simple. It has to be. If we have a standard, if we have a new product, we can't just push that onto the market, because if we do, it loses credibility. We don't get buy-in from those who have to use it. So the user group trials, the approach that we take is either to take existing standards in development, existing products, processes in development, and bring together a selection of users from the industry to test these things out, to report back on them, to help us improve them. We're fortunate that we have a feedback mechanism in the UK, and our feedback mechanism is to the BIM task group. We met with them on the early trials, and they realised that what we were doing was important. So our members, our user members, actually have a direct link back through the BuildingSMART user group to the people who create and manage the standards themselves. So we think it's pretty important. So what we're going to do this morning is to look very briefly at 3 trials in a bit more detail of 2 of them. And let me try and explain that. There are 3 trials currently being undertaken in the UK. One is led by Gary Scott of Skanska. Now, unfortunately, due to an illness in the family, Gary he will not be able to be with us today. But the reports on his trials will be made public to the BuildingSMART community when he has the feedback and has time to report them. We also have Gary's trial was looking at product data, how we're collecting and reporting product data, as I say, so watch this space, I suppose. The second trial has a lead of Nick Nesbit, and I think many of you in the room know Nick, and again, I'm sure that Nick would want me to pass on his apologies. As you may be aware, he had a very close family bereavement this week, so this is why Nick is not able to be with us. But we're delighted to have Dan Rossiter, who works for BRE, and Dan has worked with Nick on the EIR project. And literally at the last minute, yesterday, I saw him beavering away preparing a presentation. So Dan, thank you for that. And finally, we have the chair of the UK user group, Jeff Stevens from Vinci. Again, many of you will know Jeff. And Jeff is looking at one of the missing links, I would say, that the industry is acknowledging, and that is how do we either prepare, create, but more importantly, transform and move the data from Cobie into a usable format into an asset management system. So I'm not going to say anything else now. Dan, your slides are up, mine aren't. Here's the button, it works. Next.
Fab, thanks Dave, I hope that does work. There it is. Good morning everyone. Before I start, I just want to say it's pretty special to be stood up here. The RIBA must be slipping a little as having an architectural technologist up here. I think it's something they normally wouldn't do, so I think it's quite special. I'm going to talk to you today about the BuildingSMART EIR template as part of the technical group. As David just mentioned then, I am a member of BRE and also BuildingSMART UK. Didn't have to say next. Fab. Right, for context then, before we start, I just wanted to briefly tell you what an EIR is. The EIR, or Employers' Information Requirements, is one of the key contract documents that we specify here in the UK. You can see it there, surrounded by a nice big red box. So it's one of the key things that we set out quite early in a project. In fact, when we look at the information delivery lifecycle, it appears right in the very top corner, and it's one of the first key things that gets set out when working on a BIM project. So it's very important. It actually is used to help specify the project information model. So it's one of the key documents at the start of the scheme that informs what's happening throughout the whole project. So because of this, it's actually a very important thing to make sure we get right. Now, as we all know, if garbage goes in, garbage comes out. So it's very important to make this process data-driven and to make sure that we have good information at the start, so we end up with good information at the end. To do that, our goal was threefold, really. It was to make sure that the EIR template supported the delivery of asset data, making sure that we controlled what asset data we wanted, so that in terms of operation, it was useful and fit for purpose. The fact that we wanted to support the supply chain's response, so it was giving them information that they could respond to in their BIM execution plans, and ultimately to make sure that it is user-friendly. I mean, one of the things that I think we do in the UK is we're not very good with our terminology. Over here, we call it an employer's information requirement. In New Zealand, it's called a BIM Brief, which I think is a much more user-friendly, engaging way of describing this kind of document. Just note that the actual EIR is currently draft at the moment, and if you want to have a say in it, you can go onto the BuildingSMART UK members website, you can download it on there, and you can feed back. Please provide feedback. The idea is that we want to make this as industry appropriate as possible, so we'll take any and all comments as candid as you like, and we'll look at them, consider them, and try and incorporate them in. It's currently an evolving process, and we want something at the end that's fit for purpose. So if you're not a member, please join and you can have your say. Fab. So one of the things that I think this does really well, our employees' information requirements, is it's pitched to the right audience. Now, when you look at some of these documents, sometimes you have to sit there and ask who they're actually for. Now, as this is an employer's information requirement, it makes sense that it should be for the employer. Now, we spoke yesterday, Anne mentioned it briefly, this idea about jargon and building smart speak. And when you talk about a lot of this, it's quite confusing. For a quick show of hands here, is anyone on the design side and deals with employers? Yeah, I'm architecturally based, so I counted about half of you as opposed to a number. Put your hand up if you've ever had a really good, clear brief from a client. One. Great. And that's not the problem of the client. I think that's a problem from us as an industry. We're not very good at giving them direction on the information that we want to get from them. And there's a danger that if we give out lots of technical information, the client will result to having us fill it in, which means that when something goes wrong, they don't really understand what's in the documentation, and it's been about our interpretation of it. So if anything, it forms kind of strange Chinese whispers where we're telling them and then they're telling the documents and then they're telling their supply chain. So it can get a bit difficult and something can get lost in translation. And in fact, that's not really a BIM thing. BIM needs to be a lean process, and adding those extra steps in there isn't very lean at all. And these are the kind of terms we use. This is just a quick Wordle. I quite like these word clouds. I think they're always quite useful. And this is straight off one of the BuildingSMART UK websites. And you can see all these terminology on there, but things like IFCs, BSDDs, IDMs, and things like that are not necessarily language that the client actually uses. So if we want to engage with them, I think we need to use simpler terms. And this is one of the things that we tried to address. And it's important to try and think what the typical employer actually looks like when we actually start using these things. Because I think we tend to be quite introvert with our language. I tend to joke quite often that if a friend asks me what I do for a living and I try and describe BIM to them, it's actually a very difficult thing to do. Because I can use all this great industry terminology, but in terms of sitting in the pub and saying what it all actually is, it gets quite difficult because we're not used to using plain language. So, in terms of how to develop an EIR, we've got some guidance from the government, which has been a very useful document when it started. It has lots of details on the kind of information you need as part of employees' information requirements. But it's very important to note that this document is actually over 2 years old. It's not a current document, and since then, we have had a plethora of standards come out as well. So there needs to be sort of an updating to make it a bit more contemporary as well, because a lot has happened in the industry in the last 2 years, which I don't think is currently reflected in the guidance. And hopefully, our employees' information template helps to do that. Now, I also note that it's going to be a template as well. It's not guidance. It's there for the idea that it could be used and populated, as opposed to a framework on how to create something like this. So again, the idea that you can empower the person using it to complete it without having to seek further guidance. The way it works is it's been split into 2 key sections. The first is about the unique aspects, so things about the facility, product, site and project. So these are the kind of the one-time information that you need to include. And then the second section is more about general information. So in here is where you could populate aspects from your asset information requirements or your organisational information requirements. Those of you who might be a repeat client doing lots of housing projects, school projects, your asset and your organisation requirements actually might be the same for every project. And this gives you the idea to lump all these in a general place and just focus on what's unique about each scheme. And the way it works, hopefully, is relatively simple. You've got a simple title everywhere, you've got a description of what's going on, and you're given, next, there you go, guidance. So what happens at each stage, it actually sits there and it tells you what should be in each stage. So for example, this bit now, we're talking about the facility and trying to identify where it is. So it talks to you about why it's important to have identifying names, what kind of information should be in there. And then what that does, it follows by actually asking you to populate the IFC attribute data. So we're actually then talking in common languages again. Dave mentioned that I was making my PowerPoint yesterday for this. Steve Hamill, I thought, dropped us in a little when he talked about the fact that the Digital Planner Works would be able to export out all this information and go into our EIR. I had a little panic, and then I quickly remembered, well, no. They're dealing with the same language. They're talking in IFC, Cobie information. That's what we're doing, which means that through sort of a happy accident or brilliant design, we've actually got a system that actually ties in very well together that I only found about yesterday. And that's because we're working on these common languages. And when sometimes it's hard to see the practical use of some of this sort of open language. And I think that was a very kind of quick, easy one. Kind of, so we have got systems that do talk together. And it's because of these open BIM initiatives. So as I said, yeah, you can export out of your Digital Planner Works and you could add all the information in. It also has suggestions on where you can find the information, which I think is a very useful aspect to it as well. So for example, here we've got the roles, and it tells you straight away that if you want, you can use the roles from the PAS, and you can look those up and find those, and it gives you suggestions for finding other information as well. Because heaven forbid, someone suggests something different, or even you think up your own standards. Whereas, you know, kind of a serious client or something, or you have particular ways of doing things, like the NHS or something, you may want to go off-piste for some of the things you're doing. Of course, we do suggest that, where possible, you should choose the standards that have been created in preference. But there's flexibility built into it if you want to. So what we've done, in principle, is that we've used one of the key principles of our technical group, is to use basic language so that we can incorporate all the data and all the information together, which means ultimately your client doesn't need one of those to become one of these. And that's it. Yes.
Just one question, if I may, please, Dan. And I don't know if you can answer this one, but... okay. Does that... Oh, fantastic. That would have solved the problem. The fact that it's a user trial, we are testing this out with BuildingSMART members. I don't know if you can mention those who are taking part in this trial, or indeed if you know that at the present moment in time.
I don't know that at present, but I have been vigorously suggesting people to use it, and I suggest that all of those who are members today do the same, because ultimately, as I said, we want it suitable for industry. So if you don't test it, try it, feedback, then it's a small group of us who have dictated what it needs to be, not a whole industry that tells us what it should be.
Okay, I say perhaps an unfair question, because I know you dropped in this right at the last minute. I don't know the organisations that are taking part, but I do know that Nick has a number of contractors and users who are actually testing this out in a live situation at the moment, which is obviously what we try to do as a user group.
That's great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
No? I get off scot-free? Great.
Good job. Thank you. Next up, are you going to do that? Oh, you're not doing it? All right. Jeff is taking this with. All right, so Jeff, you're going to talk about Cobie and going into AIM.
Amy.
Oh, no, you're there.
Oh.
Okay, so Cobie going into asset management. I'll just let you be.
I think this is the start. Anyway. I'm Jeff Stevens, Head of BIM at Vinci and also Chair of the BuildingSMART user group. Now, hopefully this will work. I think I got you here on false pretenses. I've already changed the title of the presentation. I think it's my experiences of creating Cobie data for asset management rather than the next stage of how good we are or bad we are at getting it into an asset management system, because it is quite a struggle to get good information from the processes we currently work with. Let's start a bit upbeat. This is a use case that I did based on Cobie, probably started 3 or 4 years ago when I was challenged, can we capture inspections of a 30, 40-year-old pressure vessel and use Cobie IFC to bring all the information together? So this is a nuclear power station. There's a section, there's a reactor that was being, pressure vessel that was being inspected. So you can see that was done with quill pen and parchment in the 1960s. We found those in our archive, and the client found them sometime later in their archive, so we hadn't lost the information. So there was 4 pressure vessels in 2 power stations, and there was thousands of assets to inspect, tens of thousands of photographs, gigabytes of data, lots of inspection records, and somebody said, yeah, my colleague David Lennon in the Technology Centre put it all together in a Cobie spreadsheet. So we started with nothing because we had 2D drawings. So I started beavering away, creating the geometry in the Cobie spreadsheets, and then added some annotation from a Revit model so we knew where we were. And you've got to sort of think, what does this really look like? Well, we've unwrapped a cylinder basically, and this is looking at one panel where you can see the notions of the brown areas are wires wrapped round the cylinder of the vessel to stop it expanding, keep the hoop stresses in the vessel. And they were expecting the anchor sockets. And that's just what Cobie does. That's as far as you can get with creating geometry in a Cobie spreadsheet. Bounding boxes, which is not really what the client wanted because he didn't recognise his infrastructure there. So we did some model substitution. We got a Cobie spreadsheet, we exported it as an IFC file using Nick Nesbit's BIM services tools, and then substituted more specific geometry to the simple rectangular boxes. So Cobie was almost the beginnings of things. We'd already moved into IFC because it's far more rich in what we can do with it. So we used XSLT engines that Nick had to substitute the geometry. So there's the concrete panel with the anchor sockets, and here's the anchor sockets with the liner for the wires, and we can actually see the green, see the anchor pegs in the socket. So that geometry looks far more familiar to the client, and that's viewing the resulting data in an IFC viewer. So we've added into the attributes table and document references for all the photos, all the information that we captured. And if you click on those objects, you can find information, the metadata, the Cobie data, the properties about the objects. If you follow the link, you could get to a picture. I'll show you that a bit later. We took this a bit further. Next. We put the IFC file into a PDF as a 3D model into a PDF file. It's a shame that the client couldn't open this because their form of PDF was rather old of them, but we did it anyway. So I've double-clicked that image in the PDF file, and that's the same IFC data in Acrobat Reader. So we've highlighted a socket, and you can see the metadata associated with it. If you followed the link, you would get to the extranet where the photographs have been uploaded, and you can see there's a picture of that particular anchor peg in that socket. So we've tied Cobie IFC to the real world. So that did work, and so it's more than the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet's almost a backward step. Think IFC model, you can view the Cobie data in the form of a spreadsheet, but it's probably better to keep everything in an IFC models, federated set of models. Another example we've looked at is a P21 hospital, where we attempted to say what we wanted to capture, because nobody had thought about it. It was an early adopter project, and we just were volunteered to do it. Lots of guidance, which is confusing. If you print all that out, it doesn't fit in an A4 folder, so it's quite challenging. We've got design management plans, procedures, BIM execution plans. We tried to ask the client what systems. So he ticked all his systems from his standard FM manual, and we found not all of them existed in the building, so we started ticking some of the boxes. Then we looked a bit more detailed, but it's still a tick boxing exercise. It doesn't get you anywhere, really. We tried to say what zones were important, so we identified a few. Another difficult, how are we going to classify things? And we never got to the bottom of that, because when we looked at the various building models, nothing was classified when we looked at it in IFC, never mind in Cobie. But that's what we wanted. So I think that's based on Uniclass 2, which is now Uniclass something to be announced. Was it announced yesterday? No.
2015, they said.
2015 now? Yeah. Fine, yeah. I think this is from a slide that Brigitte presented some time ago. If you look at it from a Cobie point of view, it's overwhelming. That's Cobie, you can't see it, but there's a heck of a lot of cells you could fill out. Perhaps Brigitte's view was minimum Cobie. Right. It's been made worse by BS 1192 Part 4 because they've added more attributes to some of the tables, so it's got a little more detail. Memo J have got a view of what information one of their asset management systems could import, but most of it isn't used. And P21 have come up with a similar, very minimalistic set, which is still quite challenging to deliver. But what did we get? Well, in our extranet, we'd implemented BIM Level 1, so we had a common data environment. I could find the 3 discipline models without really knowing whether they were there. They were Revit files. I also found the IFC files that went with the Revit models and some of the subcontractors' models, which was a good start. But Celebi then said, your models are scattered. Some are at Land's End and some are on the site. An issue for BuildingSMART and the IFC certification, I think. It's not really, it's a simple issue. Jeff just, I just edited the IFC files and then discovered they weren't all, the edits were different for each of the 3 disciplines, which was very worrying. They'd all decided on their own where their local origin was, but Revit, bless Revit, had managed to handle that internally, but once you come out in an IFC world, you see reality that things weren't exactly in the same place. Further inspection, despite saying at the top how we wanted things to be named level-wise, all the disciplines decided to invent their own. I think the MEP contractor got it right, which is fantastic. 1 level per story, not lots to help you create the model. So more issues to be resolved, potentially. We did get some federated models. There's an issue in the viewer there. There's some gaps in the walls. Worrying. But it's quite complicated. There's hundreds of thousands of objects in there, and this is viewing in the 4 projects BIM modules. So this is BIM in a browser on your desktop. You can see the whole model. So it is quite complicated. And if you click on that exhaust terminal, you can see there's lots of lovely properties. but it's probably the properties that the designer decided he'd put in there, not the ones we perhaps wanted in the ER if we bothered to define them. But there's no standard. So we need a data dictionary, as we've all been saying, so there's a consistent single source of the truth. So looking more at, can we create Cobie from these federated IFC files? The answer was yes. This is again in 4P looking at that data. We've found 5 IFC models. We've federated them together, so we've got a snapshot of them. And we can say, well, I can view one or many of them and create Cobie spreadsheets from one or more of them. So that's looking at Cobie data in a browser from 4 projects for each of the disciplines. The most important ones are architectural and MEP. There's probably hardly any structural information from a Cobie asset point of view, but they're the information's listed. And the federation program could be more work to be done, but we're beginning to say, well, what bits do I want aggregated together? And in the background, it creates Cobie spreadsheets. But there's lots of errors. If you look there, that one says 2,232 errors, lots of warnings. I think this is the architectural spaces. You can see the plant rooms modelled there in the architectural model, but oops, where's the plant room in the MEP model? The fact that I referenced the IFC file into the MEP model, it's still not there in the Cobie data for that, so most of the important plant is not going to be referenced to any spaces. So we've clearly got issues to solve. We need more consistent use of a common data environment. That's basic. In many of our projects, we find it's used as a dumping ground, and you have to know really where it was put to find it. And we need better 3D models. We need things to be classified. We need improved IFC export, which does put classification in the right place in an IFC file rather than perhaps leaving it behind or hiding it somewhere. IFC to Cobie mapping can be improved, so I'm in control and not the hard coding that's provided by, at the moment, by some of the tools. So, which FM systems can import Cobie spreadsheet? Many of them say they can, but I've struggled to do it with the experts from our FM provider. It's no good. If I can't do it, nobody's going to better do it. But it is possible. We did it 10 years ago in Cobie IFC, or IFC trials in EU and UK funded projects. So it can be done, it just needs a little more effort on our parts. So let's now look at a project where we've simplified it. Now, we thought repeatable rooms, it's only going to have a certain number of assets in the file. So P21 looked at repeatable hospital rooms, but sadly, when I looked at the 3D model, all the rooms are in one model. So it looked nice, and you could cut it up and create the drawings to show the repeatable rooms. But that's where we stopped on that particular set of information. You could create lovely reports. The next group of rooms that the P21 people have done is for mental health, and these are just, I think, were published this week. And this is, I think there's 3 basic room types, and they've got 2 or 3 or 4 variations. And this is a type, this is a single bedroom, type 1, type 2. You can see the furniture jiggling around a bit. So there's 4 variants. And I've started to look at the models. We try to say we want the repeatable rooms modelled in a way that the fabric, where the rooms sit in notional spaces, is modelled. So that's we've got the external walls and some internal walls. Perhaps some of the internal walls should be part of a repeatable room in an architectural fabric model, which would be substituted by the actual building. And this is the furniture, the architectural furniture in the room and the MEP in the room. So we've separated them out, which was a start from the previous one. We've now got models for each room where we've separated disciplines. And we can view that data in various IFC viewers and look at get access to the properties. They're all a bit ad hoc because depending on what building library, BIM library, object library you used, or whether it was a Revit family created, they're ad hoc. Building data dictionary, you need to get some consistency rather than a random list of attributes in a Cobie attribute table. So there's a wash-hand basin with property, valve with some property. So there's lots of rich data. And there seems to be quite a lot for that space exported into a Cobie spreadsheet. But The facility is not properly defined. You'd have thought that would be easy, but it's probably the worst thing. BIM doesn't like exporting the facility. Multiple floor names, as we saw in my hospital example, rather than one story in the model. Spaces are not classified. Components are not always associated to a space. Type names are not unique enough for Cobie, for the Cobie BS spec. I need control on how do I create names in that are unique, not just the part name in the family. It's not good enough because it's all called standard, small, large. Hardly any types have classification. That's just better modelling, better exporting of IFC to a classification object. Type properties are not consistently defined. Again, data dictionary. Component, not always referenced to a valid type name. That's just sloppy export mapping. The objects are there, but we don't seem to have got the relationships between types and components. At a system level, not all systems are classified. And that can be quite challenging for BIM systems. Some systems have a system name, don't have even a system name defined, so they exist, but they're not really called anything. And the names in the systems, it would seem, don't exist in the component sheet, so that's worrying. So, and I won't go on to the attributes because that would bore you to death. So we need to go back to basics. So I think David mentioned there's 3 trials. Well, I've invented a 4th trial, which is using simple Cobie data requirements. I think we've got to go back and say, just handle classification. Can we use a classification system that the UK use? Can we import it into all our BIM systems without it saying syntax error? Or you can't do it because it's hard-coded to a classification system that's come from another part of the world. Will the classification get exported into the right place into an IFC file? There may be more than one classification system defined, so let's have them all. Not at a component, perhaps at the component, the family level, but perhaps at the instance level, perhaps the actual way it's being categorised internally by the BIM system as well. That would be very useful to get a handle on when we're post-processing data as to what the objects actually are. So it goes on. So the objectives is to carry out a number of simple trials to establish where asset data is missing or lost during the process, and then we'll have discussions with the various parties in the process to try and improve the situation. And the more detailed one is basically looking at, if we've got this Cobie data, can we get it into FM systems? So can Cobie Spreadsheet data or an IFC model be imported into the asset management system? And the user group has said, well, it's probably quite easy to read, ignore most of the errors, but it would be a good trial to see, well, can you do a round trip? Can you export a Cobie Spreadsheet IFC data from your asset management system, having added a management regime or spares details? Because then we'll see, have you really understood the data you've imported? And we could, at the end of when FM provision changes, you'd expect that asset data to be transferred to the next incumbent. The people involved are Causeway, FSI, Concept Evolution, IBM Maximo and Active Plan, and you can see the users who are working. And we've got some measures of success. But this work hasn't really started. Too much work in the day job, but in the next 3-4 months, I'm going to try and take this a little further forward. I've tried with IBM Maximo and not got as far as I would like, but it is possible. So we just got to struggle on and really test things out with some simple models. And the models, which are open source, duplex from BuildingSMART in the US and the Cobie Billies, there's the office model. These are everybody can get their hands on, and then use your own as you like we have. We've found the P21 hospital and the repeatable rooms as test examples. And just one more thing. I think having created all this Cobie data, 50% of it is probably not in the design detailing stage. It's captured in construction and handover. So we need to find tools that will use mobile devices, simple forms, that will allow our supply chain from there own sort of private, lightweight, common data environments to capture this type information, material information, object information, commissioning information, and add it to the IFC model, federated model of the which contains all the asset data. Having got that, we'll have a full data set, and we can then challenge the FM providers to import the data. So at that point, I'll finish.
All right, any questions? Okay, hold on a second. You're doing good. I can do it. I'm going to go back there because they haven't had a chance yet. All right, who's back here? There was one. Oh, Paul.
Have you considered running any trials for infrastructure projects to see how Cobie can cope with those as well?
Yeah, you're quite right. We've got to find some examples in infrastructure. I think that's a little more challenging because IFC for infrastructure perhaps doesn't exist, but there's a heck of a lot of those objects could be exported as they are anyway, as we know. So, yeah, I think we're focused on the buildings because those are the ones that are most advanced, but some of the Crossrail stations have got equally the same issues. We're wanting to, the client wants asset data handed over, so there's perfect candidates on those projects as well.
If I may add, in BuildingSMART UK, we don't totally mirror BuildingSMART International, in other words, have all the same groups or rooms. We just have the technical and the user. However, a bit of news kind of out now that we're looking to set up an infrastructure group in BuildingSMART UK. So again, it's a plea for people involved in the infrastructure community in Open BIM to please come and get involved in that. And I think then, Paul, you're right, we want to do trials. Our first bit of work, if you like, on behalf of BuildingSMART International is the work we're doing on IFC for infrastructure and working with the Environment Agency and other government bodies on what's needed to go forward. I think once we've done that piece of work, which we'll be reporting in June, July period, we'll then start looking to do some actual trials, of which actually there is one, which is in the Environment Agency levies, which is in the southeast of England. Nick Nesbit knows all the details. So we will be setting up an infrastructure group in the UK, and we want to do more trials. And the other, if you like, final, I'll do it in the infomercial. Please, all you here today, please come and join BuildingSMART. Come and join BuildingSMART UK, because I know a lot of you aren't. A lot of you are, I'm sure. I know most of you are. But come and join. And when you join, then come and get involved in these user trials, because this is probably, I think, one of our most important job in BuildingSMART UK. So it's all well and good we develop the standards in international, as David said, but we need to make sure these standards work in real life and with users. So that's my plea, if you like. Come and join BuildingSMART UK and come and get in these trials and work with David. He is doing a brilliant job, and Jeff on that. So thank you.
And I just make a pitch for women. Come on, I'm one of 3 that go to these meetings, so come on in. Water's warm. They're nice. They don't bite. Maybe we should have, free drinks, something. I don't know. But I'm just saying. We don't charge them to come in. Anyway, just my pitch. Anyway, you have a question.
David, you raised the issue
Jeff.
at one point, Sir Jeff, Jeff, about levels. What software was used where you had the issues with the levels?
All of them.
Because what worries me is there's obviously the whole PAS 1192 information checking.
Yeah,
I
think
process,
it's
all these other issues.
I think it's almost a drafting issue. There's many concepts you can use in the packages, and how some of those concepts get exported into IFC, and rather than using reference planes, use a story, and then you end up with a multitude of stories. You can stop it if you know what you're doing. You say, I only want that story to come out. But you shouldn't have to do that. If the brief says this, it means the ERs are just ignored by everybody down the line. So perhaps we're still not conveying that information properly.
And there's also an ISO on how you should be using levels and naming.
Yeah.
I'm coming over.
have is Autodesk is a member of any person from Autodesk, a member of BuildingSMART, because we know about the classification issue when Uniclass 1.4 released and Autodesk never incorporated it, and they always have an OmniClass. Is there any pressure on them?
Autodesk are members of BuildingSMART internationally and in the UK, so I'm sure this, now Uniclass X is published, it will be very quickly introduced into the UK European variants of those products.
Did you get your answer? I'm sorry, where are we going? Any? You guys just want to go to break, don't you? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff.
Right, thanks.
Appreciate it. All right, before you go to break, though, please look